Hey guys, tonight we step softly into a world where the ancient rhythms of China still hum beneath the surface of time. You find yourself standing in the hush of an old bamboo grove, the stalks whispering in the evening breeze like a choir of sleepy wind chimes. It smells faintly of wet earth and wood smoke, and the only thing you need to do here is nothing. That, of course, is easier said than done, especially if you're used to 20 open browser tabs and a phone buzzing with urgent memes. Here, though, in the philosophy of Wu Wei, doing less is not laziness, it's living smart. You probably wouldn't survive very long in ancient China, at least not without some practice. Picture yourself trying to carry 2 buckets of water on a shoulder pole. You'd wobble down the village path like an untrained circus act, splashing half the load onto your shoes. But the local farmer doesn't even break a sweat. He just walks, steady and unhurried, as though the pole balances itself. That's the magic of Wu Wei. It's the art of letting life carry you, rather than wrestling with it until you drop. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It always amazes me to see the constellation of sleepy viewers across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward in the narrative, brushing against the idea that this ancient philosophy isn't about becoming a couch potato. Wu Wei literally means non-action, but it's more like non-forcing. It's about rowing downstream with the current instead of trying to paddle against it until your arms fall off. Laozi, the sage behind much of Taoist thought, once put it simply: the best way to live is like water, gentle, adaptable, and persistent enough to carve canyons while never looking like it's trying. Historians still argue whether Laozi was a real man wandering the dusty roads of the Zhou dynasty, or more of a mythical composite, invented so people could quote him at dinner parties. Either way, his sayings shaped a civilization. And you, standing here with your sandals in the dust, realize the absurdity of modern life's obsession with efficiency. In a world without email, nobody cared about inbox zero. People cared about listening to the crickets, about not overwatering their rice, about breathing slowly enough that their candle didn't flicker out too soon. It's dull in the most delightful way, like waiting for water to boil but realizing you don't actually mind the wait. One mainstream fact: during the Warring States period, many schools of philosophy competed for attention. Confucianism, legalism, Mohism, and Taoism among them. Each offered a survival guide in chaotic times. Quirky tidbit: some Taoist practitioners believed you could extend your life by eating certain rare minerals. A theory that ended awkwardly when emperors ingested mercury and, well, proved mortality still applied. Still, the dream of effortless longevity persisted. You picture yourself sitting on a straw mat in a dimly lit hut, listening to a traveling teacher describe how forcing things is like trying to hold a fish with clenched fists. It just slips away. Better to cup your hands gently and let it rest there. The lesson is obvious, but somehow soothing. You feel your shoulders drop just hearing it. And maybe that's the true secret. Wu Wei works because it lets you exhale. A breeze carries the smell of wood smoke from a nearby cooking fire, and you imagine an ancient family gathering around rice bowls, talking softly about the harvest. They don't say, "Let's maximize synergy in Q3. They say, "Let's wait and see if the rains come." Their sleep, when it comes, is deep. No glowing screens, no coffee at 10 p.m. Just the sound of frogs, a heavy blanket of stars, and the philosophy that tomorrow can handle itself. You smile a little at the thought that maybe you should try this at home. Less planning, more flowing. Though, fair warning, Wu Wei won't do your laundry for you. Unless, of course, you decide that wrinkled shirts are part of the Tao. You wake with the sunrise. Or maybe you never quite fell asleep, because in this world you don't need blackout curtains or white noise apps. The rooster crow is your alarm clock, and it's set permanently to early. You rub your eyes, pull on your rough-spun tunic, and step barefoot onto the packed earth yard of a farmer's house. The air smells faintly of damp straw and steamed millet, and in the distance you hear the slap of sandals against mud as neighbors shuffle toward their fields. The farmer's routine is gentle but relentless, like the steady tick of a water clock. He doesn't rush. He shoulders a hoe, pats the family dog, and moves toward the rice paddies with the kind of patience that comes from knowing this work is eternal. You follow, a little clumsy, stepping into soft clay. You nearly lose a sandal in the muck, which earns you a grin from the farmer. He doesn't laugh. Laughter wastes breath. But you can see his amusement in the quiet twitch of his eyebrows. Rice cultivation in ancient China wasn't just agriculture, it was philosophy in action. Every step, flooding the paddy, planting each shoot, tending it day by day, was a reminder that nature leads and you follow. Mainstream fact, by the Zhou dynasty, rice paddies had become central to Chinese food security, shaping the rhythm of village life. Quirky tidbit, some farmers tied little bells to ducks and set them loose in the fields. The ducks gobbled up pests while jingling merrily through the water, an ancient, quacking form of pest control. Historians still argue whether these duck squads were widespread or just a regional oddity, but the image is charming enough that you decide it should have been mandatory. The farmer shows you how to plant by pressing each sprout between thumb and forefinger, then lowering it into the mud. It's repetitive, almost hypnotic. After a while, you forget to count how many shoots you've placed. You just breathe with the farmer, in and out, squatting and standing, arms flowing like a slow dance. This, you realize, is Wu Wei disguised as hard labor, effort without forcing, harmony hidden in mud. When he pauses, he gestures to the sky. Clouds roll lazily overhead, and you notice he doesn't check a sundial or fret about deadlines. His calendar is the crane circling above, the shifting angle of sunlight on the water. The farmer's patience isn't passive, it's practiced. He trusts the season to deliver, even if the harvest looks slim. It's not faith in the supernatural, it's faith in rhythm, the kind that turns chaos into something you can nap through. As noon approaches, you're drenched in sweat, though your farmer companion looks like he's been out for a stroll. He motions you toward the shade of a willow tree, where his wife lays out bowls of rice porridge flavored with scallions. You slurp gratefully, though it's bland compared to modern fast food. Still, there's something calming about eating slowly, spoon by spoon, while cicadas sing overhead. You're not scrolling, not multitasking, just existing. And maybe that's enough. Another fact to chew on. Chinese farmers often measured time with water clocks, pottery jars dripping at a steady rate. It was accurate enough to decide when to rest and when to return to the fields. Quirky aside, some villagers believed sleeping directly under a mulberry tree was bad luck, since spirits supposedly favored those branches. Historians still argue whether that superstition came from genuine folk tales or a clever trick to stop kids from napping where silkworms were raised. By the time the sun dips low, you've learned something obvious yet profound. Life in the paddies isn't about sprinting. It's about steady presence. You can't rush rice into growing any more than you can hurry sleep into arriving. Both happen when they're ready. And while you wouldn't exactly sign up for a lifetime of muddy sandals, you feel oddly soothed knowing that the farmer will repeat this tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, until seasons cycle again as they always do. You glance back toward the grove where we started, and it feels like you've carried a piece of it here. Wu Wei isn't just for poets in silk robes. It's in the bent back of a farmer, the duck with bells on its neck, and the patience that lets rice seedlings become dinner. You've had your fill of muddy sandals and duck bell jingles, so you step away from the paddies, following a narrow path that snakes toward the banks of the Yangtze. The river spreads before you like a moving mirror, silver under the sunlight, wide enough to make you feel like an ant on its edge. The air is cool here, damp with the scent of moss and wet stone, and you can hear the rhythm of the current, slow, steady, utterly indifferent to your presence. A fisherman nods in greeting, hauling in his net with the kind of grace that comes from decades of practice. He doesn't yank, doesn't struggle. He just leans back, letting the river itself help pull the catch. It looks so easy that you're briefly tempted to try it yourself, until you remember how clumsy you were in the rice fields. Still, you're mesmerized. This is Wu Wei in motion. The way water flows, never forcing, always adapting. Mainstream fact. The Yangtze, stretching more than 6,000 kilometers, has been a lifeline of Chinese civilization for millennia, feeding villages and connecting trade routes. Entire dynasties rose and fell along its banks, and yet the river kept flowing, as if politely ignoring human drama. Quirky tidbit. Some fishermen once trained cormorants to catch fish for them, tying little strings around the birds' necks so the fish couldn't be swallowed. The birds would return, slightly offended, to deliver the catch. Historians still argue whether cormorant fishing started on the Yangtze or farther south, but either way, it's proof that even birds were pressed into effortless service. You dip a toe in, expecting icy shock, but the river greets you with a surprisingly gentle warmth. It's not exactly bath water, but it's enough to make you linger. Watching the current, you notice how it bends around rocks, smooth and unhurried. There's a lesson here. Resist less, adjust more. You don't fight the stone, you glide around it. The fisherman smiles as though he read your mind, then tosses his net again. As you walk further along the bank, you come across a group of children skipping stones. They laugh at your first attempt, which plops straight down like a rock disguised as, well, a rock. The second try is better. 3 bounces before sinking. The kids clap politely, and one girl points out that the trick is not to throw hard, but to flick lightly. Effortless. Wu Wei, again, disguised as play. You pause to imagine the river at night, lanterns floating during festivals, carrying wishes downstream. People in ancient times believed the river could deliver prayers, messages, or simply the burden of the day's worries. It's poetic, really, to hand your troubles over to something that's been flowing since before your great-great-great-grandparents. You almost want to write your Wi-Fi password on a scrap of bamboo and let the Yangtze keep it safe forever. Another fact slips into view. Taoist texts often use rivers as metaphors for wisdom and adaptability. The Tao Te Ching compares the highest goodness to water, which benefits all things without striving. Scholars still argue whether Laozi intended this as practical advice or lofty poetry, but you can't deny the imagery works. Standing here, watching the endless drift, you feel smaller but strangely freer. Quirky side note. Some villagers believed river spirits demanded offerings of rice wine to keep floods at bay. Whether or not the spirits drank, the villagers certainly did, turning superstition into community party time. You imagine a whole village tipsy on rice wine, singing to the current, and realize maybe the spirits weren't the only ones pacified. As the sun sinks, painting the river in strokes of orange and purple, you take a deep breath. The fisherman packs up, the children scatter, and you're left with the sound of water. Slower now, as though it's yawning with you. It whispers a promise. Tomorrow it will still be here, flowing past mountains, carrying secrets, lulling you if you care to listen. The Yangtze doesn't rush, it doesn't resist, it just goes on. And as you follow its rhythm, you can feel your own pulse slowing to match. Maybe the river has been teaching you something all along, that life is less about conquering tides and more about letting them carry you until eventually they lull you into sleep. You leave the river behind, its quiet murmur still echoing in your ears, and make your way toward a small village courtyard. Here, under the sloping eaves of tiled roofs, you spot two groups of scholars, robes neatly folded, brows furrowed, scrolls unfurled like battle banners. The Confucians sit in straight-backed rows, their posture as rigid as their rules. Across from them, the Taoists lean against bamboo pillars, sipping tea as if the debate were background music. You take a seat in the middle, amused that you're closer to the tea drinkers than the rule followers. The Confucian scholar clears his throat with the weight of authority. He launches into a speech about order, filial piety, proper rituals, and the idea that if everyone behaved correctly, sons respecting fathers, ministers serving emperors, the world would hum like a perfectly tuned zither. It makes sense in the way a calendar makes sense. Neat, structured, reassuring. Mainstream fact. Confucianism indeed became the backbone of Chinese civil service examinations, shaping bureaucracy for centuries. But then a Taoist sage, bearded and mischievous-eyed, interrupts, not with a counter-argument, but with a chuckle. He points to a sparrow pecking crumbs off the ground and asks, "Did the bird memorize ritual before eating?" The Confucian stiffens, insisting that humans are not birds, but you can't help snorting at the sage's timing. The Taoists love this, turning philosophy into stand-up comedy. A quirky tidbit floats your way. Some Taoist hermits were rumored to practice sleep fasting, claiming they could survive without food if they simply slept enough, dreaming meals instead. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual practice or just creative laziness, but either way, it sounds like the ultimate nap excuse. You imagine the Confucians trying it, waking up furious because they dreamed of misplacing their ritual manuals. As the debate continues, you notice how both sides sip tea. The Confucians raise their cups with deliberate precision, as though each gesture is graded. The Taoists slurp loudly, letting steam fog their brows. Oddly enough, both approaches look satisfying in their own way. You shift your weight, trying not to doze off, and catch another argument. The Confucian insists that without structure, society collapses into chaos. The Taoist counters that forcing order creates more chaos than it prevents. They go back and forth, the tension rising, until a breeze stirs the bamboo above. The leaves rustle, and both camps pause, listening. In that moment of silence, you realize neither side has won. The bamboo, bending and swaying without breaking, has just delivered the clearest argument of the day. Another historical fact for you. During the Han Dynasty, the state officially endorsed Confucianism, but Taoist ideas persisted underground, influencing medicine, art, and spiritual practice. Quirky aside, one emperor even tried to mix both by promoting rituals while secretly consulting Taoist alchemists for immortality potions. Spoiler, they didn't work. Scholars still argue whether that contradiction weakened or enriched Chinese culture. But standing here, you feel like contradictions might be the point. The debate finally winds down, with the Confucians retreating to their scrolls and the Taoists drifting off toward the tea house. You trail after the latter, because, let's be honest, the tea smells better than the ink. As you sip a warm cup, you realize this whole scene has taught you something. Wu-wei isn't about choosing sides. It's about letting the world unfold without forcing it to fit a single mold. Sometimes the rules are helpful. Sometimes the sparrow just eats. You laugh softly into your cup, surprising yourself. Who knew philosophy could taste like jasmine and sound like a comedy duel? You wander away from the chatter of the scholars, your sandals brushing against dusty stones, until you stumble into a quieter part of the village. The houses here are modest, their roofs sloping down like sleepy eyelids, and smoke curls from clay chimneys. You duck through a doorway and find yourself inside a traditional home. The air is thick with the fragrance of oil lamps and warm bamboo. A family gestures for you to sit. No grand welcomes, just a quiet nod, as if you've always belonged here. The floor is cool and packed hard by countless bare feet. You brush your hand along woven mats laid carefully in neat rows. This is where people rest, where sleep arrives not from expensive mattresses but from bamboo's natural springiness. Mainstream fact. Ancient Chinese beds often weren't beds at all but simple platforms, mats, or low couches that doubled as daytime seating. Luxury homes might have lacquered wooden frames with silk drapery, but most families slept on woven bamboo that breathed in the humid summers. You settle onto one of the mats, noticing the faint creak beneath your weight. It isn't soft. Your spine complains immediately, but there's something grounding about it. You can hear everything: the chirp of crickets, the faint drip of water outside, the distant laughter of children finishing their evening games. Without glass windows, sound slips in and out like a friendly neighbor. You find yourself listening, lulled into stillness. A quirky tidbit floats your way. Some people stuffed pillows with herbs or jade dust, believing they improved sleep quality and even spiritual clarity. Jade dust in a pillow sounds luxurious now, but probably felt like resting your head on a bag of pebbles. Historians still argue whether these exotic pillows were genuinely meant for comfort or simply a status symbol to impress guests. Either way, you imagine waking up with a stiff neck and trying to convince yourself it was worth it, because my dreams were shinier. The family prepares for bed in an unhurried rhythm. A mother trims the lamp wick until the flame glows low and amber. A father unrolls a thin quilt, patched but carefully folded. The children splash water from a clay basin onto their faces, laughing at the chill, before climbing onto the mat. There's no scrolling through phones or last-minute emails. The evening ends when the oil burns low and the crickets declare the curfew. As you lie back, you notice the walls painted faintly with shadows. Branches swaying outside, the dance of fireflies caught in the lamplight. This isn't silence, but a symphony of tiny sounds. The odd croak of a frog, a dog barking once and then thinking better of it. Even your own breath seems louder, slower. You almost forget what a city sounds like. Another mainstream fact. Sleep in ancient China often followed a biphasic pattern. People would rest after dusk, wake for a short period in the middle of the night to talk, read, or check on animals, and then return to slumber until dawn. Quirky aside, some families believed you could scare away bad dreams by hanging gourds above the doorway, since their hollow shapes supposedly trapped wandering spirits. Historians still argue whether gourds were protective charms or simply useful for carrying water, and happened to gain a spooky reputation. You roll onto your side, feeling the mat beneath you grow strangely comfortable. Perhaps it's the rhythm of village life seeping into your bones. Without alarm clocks, you'd simply wake with the sun and sleep with the dark. There's a freedom in that. No buzzing reminders, no backlit screens, just trust in the body's own timing. You yawn, almost tricked into believing you could drift off right here in this bamboo-scented room. The mother hums softly to her youngest child. It isn't a song you recognize, just a low, repetitive tone that threads through the air like smoke. You catch fragments of words about rivers and dreams, but mostly it's the cadence that soothes. You think back to the farmer's steady planting, the river's endless drift, the scholar's sparrow, and realize each moment tonight has been leading you here, to this lesson of sleep as a practice of Wu Wei. You don't force it. You don't beg for it. You let it arrive. The oil lamp flickers once, twice, and then steadies. You breathe in the smell of sesame oil, close your eyes, and for a moment you're not a traveler. You're just another sleeper in a house where the night hums with life, and rest comes as naturally as water flowing downhill. You rise again, though reluctantly, peeling yourself from the bamboo mat as dawn spills soft light across the wooden beams. The family has already begun their morning tasks, moving with the rhythm of people who don't need alarms. You step outside into a lively hum, for the village market is waking too. The air carries aromas that tangle together: sesame oil sizzling on a pan, star anise warming in broth, and dried fish stacked neatly in woven baskets. You're drawn into the bustle like a moth toward a lantern. The market is narrow, crowded with stalls shaded by makeshift awnings of patched cloth. Merchants call softly, though none shout too loud. It isn't chaos, just a steady flow, like the river you left behind. A woman offers you slices of candied lotus root. Sweet, chewy, faintly floral. It sticks to your teeth, but somehow feels like a reward for simply showing up. Mainstream fact. Markets in cities like Chang'an during the Tang Dynasty were highly regulated, with gates and curfews. But in smaller towns they often unfolded more casually, anchored by the rhythm of farming schedules. Quirky tidbit: some vendors carried trained parrots that would advertise their goods by repeating phrases. Imagine a green bird squawking, "Fresh ginger, best ginger," while pecking at your sleeve. Historians still argue whether parrots were widespread gimmicks or rare novelties, but it's safe to say they added color to the spice stalls. You pause at a shop where bundles of cinnamon bark, dried orange peel, and peppercorns are piled like treasure. The merchant lets you sniff a jar of fermented soybean paste, and you nearly recoil. It smells like someone forgot laundry in the rain. But she beams with pride, insisting it flavors half the meals in the village. She's not wrong. The fragrance clings to your sleeve as you wander deeper, past stalls hung with silk threads shimmering faintly in the sunlight. Everywhere you turn, you hear fragments of gossip mixed with the sounds of trade. Someone whispers that an imperial inspector might pass through. Another boasts that her neighbor's ducks laid more eggs than usual. Nothing urgent, nothing life-shattering, but all of it delivered with the seriousness of court decrees. It's oddly soothing. You realize gossip, too, can follow Wu Wei, drifting like incense smoke, curling into ears, never pressed too hard. You pause at a calligrapher's stall, where strips of bamboo are laid out with fresh ink. He dips his brush slowly, every stroke deliberate, though his customers are waiting. You expect impatience, but no one complains. They watch as though the act of writing itself is entertainment. Perhaps that's the point, to see words appear like water trails on sand. Another mainstream fact: bamboo slips were an early writing medium before paper spread widely, and many markets included scribes who wrote contracts or letters for the illiterate. Quirky aside, some storytellers claim that if a brush was washed in river water, the characters would sing louder. Historians still argue whether that belief was superstition or poetic metaphor. You taste your way through the stalls, chewing roasted chestnuts and slurping broth from a clay cup. The flavors aren't bold like modern street food. They're subtle, layered, designed to linger rather than shock. And isn't that the essence of Wu Wei? Nothing forced, nothing rushed. Even the spices don't try too hard. At the far end of the market, a troupe of musicians begins to play. The bamboo flute sends notes swirling into the air, thin and reedy, while a two-stringed erhu hums low beneath it. Children chase each other around the musicians, clapping off-beat but grinning. You stand still, letting the sounds fold around you. It's not a performance demanding applause. It's simply there, like the breeze, like the day unfolding. The market fades as you walk back toward the outskirts, your hands sticky with candied fruit and your ears still full of flute music. You realize that what makes this morning so soothing isn't the food or the goods. It's the unhurried rhythm of people who know life isn't conquered in one purchase. You don't leave with shopping bags or deadlines. You leave with the quiet certainty that everything you need comes, in time, with patience. You rise again, though reluctantly, peeling yourself from the bamboo mat as dawn spills soft light across the wooden beams. The family has already begun their morning tasks, moving with the rhythm of people who don't need alarms. You step outside into a lively hum, for the village market is waking too. The air carries aromas that tangle together: sesame oil sizzling on a pan, star anise warming in broth, and dried fish stacked neatly in woven baskets. You're drawn into the bustle like a moth toward a lantern. The market is narrow, crowded with stalls shaded by makeshift awnings of patched cloth. Merchants call softly, though none shout too loud. It isn't chaos, just a steady flow, like the river you left behind. A woman offers you slices of candied lotus root. Sweet, chewy, faintly floral. It sticks to your teeth, but somehow feels like a reward for simply showing up. Mainstream fact: markets in cities like Chang'an during the Tang dynasty were highly regulated, with gates and curfews, but in smaller towns they often unfolded more casually, anchored by the rhythm of farming schedules. Quirky tidbit: some vendors carried trained parrots that would advertise their goods by repeating phrases. Imagine a green bird squawking, "Fresh ginger, best ginger," while pecking at your sleeve. Historians still argue whether parrots were widespread gimmicks or rare novelties, but it's safe to say they added color to the spice stalls. You pause at a shop where bundles of cinnamon bark, dried orange peel, and peppercorns are piled like treasure. The merchant lets you sniff a jar of fermented soybean paste, and you nearly recoil. It smells like someone forgot laundry in the rain. But she beams with pride, insisting it flavors half the meals in the village. She's not wrong. The fragrance clings to your sleeve as you wander deeper, past stalls hung with silk threads shimmering faintly in the sunlight. Everywhere you turn, you hear fragments of gossip mixed with the sounds of trade. Someone whispers that an imperial inspector might pass through. Another boasts that her neighbor's ducks laid more eggs than usual. Nothing urgent, nothing life-shattering, but all of it delivered with the seriousness of court decrees. It's oddly soothing. You realize gossip, too, can follow Wu Wei, drifting like incense smoke, curling into ears, never pressed too hard. You pause at a calligrapher's stall where strips of bamboo are laid out with fresh ink. He dips his brush slowly, every stroke deliberate, though his customers are waiting. You expect impatience, but no one complains. They watch as though the act of writing itself is entertainment. Perhaps that's the point, to see words appear like water trails on sand. Another mainstream fact: bamboo slips were an early writing medium before paper spread widely, and many markets included scribes who wrote contracts or letters for the illiterate. Quirky aside, some storytellers claim that if a brush was washed in river water, the characters would sing louder. Historians still argue whether that belief was superstition or poetic metaphor. You taste your way through the stalls, chewing roasted chestnuts and slurping broth from a clay cup. The flavors aren't bold like modern street food. They're subtle, layered, designed to linger rather than shock. And isn't that the essence of Wu Wei? Nothing forced, nothing rushed. Even the spices don't try too hard. At the far end of the market, a troupe of musicians begins to play. The bamboo flute sends notes swirling into the air, thin and reedy, while a two-stringed erhu hums low beneath it. Children chase each other around the musicians, clapping offbeat but grinning. You stand still, letting the sounds fold around you. It's not a performance demanding applause. It's simply there, like the breeze, like the day unfolding. The market fades as you walk back toward the outskirts, your hands sticky with candied fruit and your ears still full of flute music. You realize that what makes this morning so soothing isn't the food or the goods. It's the unhurried rhythm of people who know life isn't conquered in one purchase. You don't leave with shopping bags or deadlines. You leave with the quiet certainty that everything you need comes, in time, with patience. The hum of the market drifts behind you, replaced by the low rumble of drums and the clink of metal. You follow the sound up a stone road toward a sprawling courtyard draped in red banners. The imperial court is in session. At first glance, it looks like chaos. Officials in long robes shuffle nervously, clutching scrolls like life preservers. One coughs into his sleeve, another mutters about grain shortages, another fans himself furiously though the day is not hot. The emperor sits high above them, expression unreadable, while his attendants dart around like anxious sparrows. You take a seat at the edge, enjoying the show. It's the ancient equivalent of office politics, except the stakes are occasionally your entire family's fortune. Mainstream fact: by the Han Dynasty, court officials were appointed based on examinations in Confucian classics, which meant they were supposed to be wise and ethical. In practice, they also gossiped, schemed, and worried about their hairlines like everyone else. As the ministers argue, you spot one figure standing calmly apart. His robe is plain, his posture relaxed, his scroll left unopened. While others trip over their words to sound important, he simply waits, breathing evenly. Finally, when the emperor gestures, he steps forward. He bows, low but not theatrical, and offers a suggestion so simple, so practical, that everyone else falls silent. The emperor nods once, dismisses the crowd, and that's it. This minister has done in 10 words what others couldn't manage in 20 scrolls. Quirky tidbit: records tell of officials who believed staying silent in meetings was a career strategy. They reasoned that if they spoke less, they'd make fewer mistakes. One story claims a minister spent years saying almost nothing but managed to retire with honors. Historians still argue whether his silence was clever restraint or sheer luck, but you suspect he might have just been the master of Wu Wei. You lean back against a pillar, smiling at the irony. The frantic advisors buzzed like bees, but the one who embodied calm became the emperor's trusted voice. You imagine your own office meetings, everyone scrambling over PowerPoints, while one person, serene and quiet, walks out with the promotion. Maybe the ancients were onto something. Another fact: emperors were often fascinated by Taoist teachings, especially the idea that rulers should govern by non-interference. The logic was simple. If the state imposed fewer rules, people would naturally organize themselves. Quirky aside, one emperor reportedly asked his advisors if he could govern by doing nothing at all. The court, predictably, panicked. Historians still argue whether this was philosophical curiosity or just an excuse for a very long nap on the throne. The session ends. Ministers scatter, robes swishing like panicked geese, while the calm official strolls out as though leaving a tea house. You follow him into a shaded corridor, where he sits cross-legged with a cup of tea. He doesn't rush the sips. He doesn't rehearse tomorrow's speech. He just drinks, gazes at the bamboo swaying outside, and breathes. You realize he's the living embodiment of the river you saw earlier, steady, effortless, quietly carving a path. You exhale too, trying to mimic his stillness. For a moment, you almost succeed. Then your stomach growls loudly enough to make a nearby servant glance over. The minister chuckles softly, not at you, but with you, as though to say, yes, even hunger is part of the Tao. The court may be frantic, the empire may wobble under its own weight, but Wu Wei thrives in the margins. In the quiet man with 10 words, in the tea cooling slowly in porcelain, in the knowledge that sometimes the best action is no action at all. You leave the court behind, its echo of clattering sandals fading, and find yourself on a narrow trail winding into the hills. The air grows cooler, scented with pine and damp stone, and mist curls low over the ground as though the mountain is exhaling. The climb is steady, and your calves complain almost immediately. You were built for naps, not pilgrimages, but you press on. Each step takes you further from noise, closer to silence. Eventually, you spot a small hut tucked into the slope. Its walls are simple wood, patched with bark, its roof sagging slightly under moss. A plume of smoke rises from a crooked chimney. Outside, barefoot and unbothered, sits the hermit. His robe is patched, his beard a little wild, and his smile as calm as the mountain itself. He doesn't leap to greet you. He doesn't even wave. He just nods, as though you were expected all along. You sit beside him on a flat rock, catching your breath. The hermit pours tea into clay cups chipped from years of use. He doesn't rush. Each motion flows like watered-down stone. Mainstream fact. Taoist hermits often retreated from villages or courts, believing the purest way to live was to withdraw from society's demands. Some wrote poetry, others practiced breathing exercises. Many simply tended small gardens. He places the tea before you, and you sip. It's bitter, earthy, almost too strong, but somehow cleansing. The hermit chuckles at your expression and gestures toward the mist, as if to say, "That is the flavor of the mountain itself." Quirky tidbit? Some recluses claimed to survive on nothing but dew gathered from leaves at dawn. Whether they truly did or just enjoyed bragging rights, historians still argue. You imagine them slurping droplets from pine needles, calling it mountain espresso. It's dedication, or perhaps stubborn thrift. The hermit begins to speak, his voice low and unhurried. He tells you that the mountain teaches without words. The mist doesn't force itself into valleys, it drifts there. The pine doesn't demand the soil to harden, it simply grows. Even the silence isn't empty. It's full of things you only hear if you stop talking. You try to listen, but your mind keeps wandering. To dinner, to how long this climb took, to whether you'll ever get phone service up here. The hermit watches your fidgeting and laughs again, softer this time, like the rustle of leaves. He points to a dragonfly hovering over a puddle. It balances perfectly, wings beating faster than your eyes can follow, yet the body seems motionless. Wu Wei in miniature. All movement, no forcing. Another mainstream fact. Taoist practices like Qigong and meditation often began in mountain retreats. These exercises focused on aligning breath with the flow of qi, or vital energy. Quirky aside, some hermits wore talismans made of peach wood, said to repel evil spirits. Historians still argue whether the wood itself mattered, or if it was just a cultural placebo. Either way, the peach tree charms made for stylish accessories. The hermit finishes his tea and sits in silence. You wait for more wisdom, but none comes. The lesson, apparently, is that no lesson is sometimes the best one. The longer you sit, the more you notice. Your breath sinking with the breeze, the steady drip of water from a nearby rock, the warmth of the cup in your hand long after the tea is gone. At some point, you realize the hermit has closed his eyes, leaning back against the hut. You worry he might have dozed off mid-philosophy, but then you remember. That, too, is Wu Wei. Teaching by not teaching, doing by not doing. You follow his lead, closing your own eyes, letting the mountain hold you. You don't climb for hours. You don't compose poetry. You just sit there with the mist and the dragonfly and the sound of your own breath, and it feels like enough. You descend from the mountain slowly, your legs wobbling like bamboo in a storm, until you return to a quieter lane in the village. Here, the air smells different. Not smoke, not rice paddies, but sharp, earthy, and a little sweet. You follow the trail of fragrance into a small shop lit by a single oil lamp. Wooden shelves sag with jars of dried roots, bundles of herbs tied with string, and bowls filled with powders ranging from pale green to deep crimson. The herbalist greets you with a nod. His robe is clean but patched, his hair bound with a simple cloth strip, and his eyes twinkle as though he already knows what you need. He motions for you to sit on a low stool. Around you, the walls seem alive with scents, ginseng sharp as lightning, lotus seeds mild as milk, licorice root cloyingly sweet. It's overwhelming and oddly comforting at the same time. Mainstream fact. Traditional Chinese medicine often emphasized balance, yin and yang, heat and cold, dryness and dampness. Many remedies were meant not to cure in the Western sense, but to nudge the body back into equilibrium. The herbalist explains this philosophy in a low voice, his words blending with the creak of the wooden beams overhead. He picks up a jar of dried chrysanthemum blossoms, crumbling a few between his fingers. He tells you they're brewed into tea that soothes headaches and brightens the eyes. He adds with a sly grin that drinking it before bed can also invite gentle dreams. You imagine ancient insomniacs sipping chrysanthemum tea instead of counting sheep, which makes you chuckle softly. A quirky tidbit: some healers swore by powdered tiger bone as a cure for everything from sleeplessness to sore knees. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or opportunistic marketing, but the practice is widely debated today for obvious reasons. You glance around the shop, half expecting a tiger bone jar, but the herbalist just smirks and offers you dried jujube fruit instead. Sweet, chewy, and harmless, like nature's candy. The herbalist leans closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. He tells you that lotus seeds boiled in milk can coax even the most restless sleeper into slumber. He taps his own eyelid for emphasis, then mimes a gentle snore. You smile, realizing that bedtime advice hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. Warm drink, steady breath, quiet night. You notice a strange charm hanging above the doorway, a small pouch of herbs tied with red string. The herbalist explains it's meant to repel nightmares, its scent too bitter for bad spirits. Another quirky aside: some households placed carved peachwood figurines by the bed to guard against ghosts. Historians still argue whether such practices were symbolic psychology or deeply held belief, but either way, they made bedtime feel safer. As you sip a small cup of herbal tea he's prepared for you, slightly bitter, slightly floral, you realize the drink is less about taste and more about ritual. The slow preparation, the warmth of the cup, the shared silence, it all signals the body that it's time to rest. You think of your own pre-sleep rituals, maybe scrolling endlessly or binge-watching shows, and you can't help laughing at how much more sense this old tea shop makes. The herbalist doesn't talk much more. He simply sits across from you, listening to the crackle of the lamp. The shop is quiet except for the soft rustle of jars as the evening breeze sneaks in. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, and for a moment you worry you'll fall asleep right on the stool. The herbalist notices, nods approvingly, and gestures toward the door, as if to say, "Yes, the medicine works. Now go dream." You step outside carrying the faint taste of herbs on your tongue. The night air feels cooler now, threaded with wood smoke and distant laughter. Behind you, the herbalist closes his door with a gentle thud, and the scent of ginseng and chrysanthemum fades into memory. You walk on, realizing that sleep, like Wu Wei, arrives when you stop forcing it. Sometimes all it takes is a warm cup and the patience to let dreams come. The herbalist's shop fades into the night as you wander down a stone-paved road, following the glow of lanterns bobbing gently in the dark. The air hums with a different kind of life here. More voices, more music, and a faint perfume of noodles simmering somewhere close by. You've arrived in the city of Chang'an, the ancient capital, and tonight it feels less like a metropolis and more like a dream dressed in silk and firelight. The lanterns swing overhead on long poles, their red paper skins glowing like captured moons. Children dart between the stalls, giggling as they chase each other with sparklers. The stone walls are painted orange by lamplight, and even the shadows look busy. You walk slowly, caught between the scents, ginger sizzling in woks, sweet wine bubbling in clay jars, and roasted chestnuts wafting warm from their baskets. Mainstream fact: Chang'an, during the Tang Dynasty, was one of the largest cities in the world, a hub of trade, poetry, and culture. Its grid layout inspired city planning as far away as Japan and Korea. But tonight, you're less concerned with urban design and more with the way the night feels alive. A troupe of street performers catches your attention. Two acrobats balance on each other's shoulders while juggling torches, the flames painting arcs against the sky. A crowd gathers, clapping politely, not loudly, because this is still a city that goes to bed early. You grin, realizing the quiet applause is almost funnier than the act itself. The acrobats bow, unbothered, then vanish into the crowd like shadows returning home. Quirky tidbit: some citizens believed poetry could cure sadness, so wandering poets were as common as noodle vendors. People would pay them in coins or dumplings to write verses on the spot. One legend tells of a poet who fell asleep mid-composition, only to wake and claim the gods had whispered the ending into his dream. Historians still argue whether that was divine inspiration or just creative napping. You stop at a noodle stall, unable to resist the aroma. The cook ladles out a steaming bowl of hand-pulled noodles, broth spiced with star anise and topped with scallions. You slurp loudly, because everyone here does, and feel the warmth settle into your chest. The cook smiles at your clumsy chopstick work, but doesn't judge. In Chang'an, food is for comfort, not competition. Beyond the food stalls, a small group of musicians sits cross-legged, plucking at a pipa and tapping a wooden drum. The music is soft, playful, like the sound of rain tapping against bamboo leaves. Couples stroll hand in hand, pausing to listen. Old men sip rice wine and nod in rhythm. You linger, letting the melody smooth out the edges of your thoughts. Another mainstream fact: city life in Tang-era Chang'an was regulated by curfews, with drums signaling when gates closed at night. Quirky aside, some residents snuck out anyway, claiming the city at night belonged to poets and lovers. Historians still argue whether Chang'an's nightlife was wild or tame, but you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, a gentle hum rather than a roaring din. As you wander deeper, you notice stalls selling painted fans, clay figurines, and silk ribbons dyed in colors you've never quite seen before. A girl offers you a paper lantern with a candle inside. She whispers that if you make a wish and release it into the night, it may drift high enough for the stars to notice. You take it, scribble a half-silly wish, maybe for an easier life, or maybe just for a pillow that doesn't smell like herbs, and let the lantern rise. It floats up, wobbling a little, then steadies, joining dozens of others glowing like a second constellation above the rooftops. You tilt your head back, watching until your lantern blends with the stars. Around you, laughter softens, music slows, and even the busiest vendors begin to douse their fires. The city exhales, settling into sleep. And you, lanternless now, feel your own thoughts drifting lighter. You walk on, the lanterns fading behind you, the night wrapping around you like a quilt stitched from firelight and noodle steam. Chang'an hums itself to bed, and you find yourself humming along, lulled by the simple truth. Even great capitals know when to close their eyes. The lanterns of Chang'an grow faint behind you as dawn begins to tease the horizon. You wander into a quieter courtyard, where a group of figures moves in silence. At first, you think they are dancing. Slow, deliberate steps, arms drifting through the air like reeds in water. But then you realize you've stumbled upon something else. It's martial practice, but not the kind with clashing swords and shouts. This is softness masquerading as strength, the body moving like smoke, the mind anchored in stillness. A teacher, hair bound neatly with a cord, motions for you to join. You shuffle in awkwardly, imitating the stance, knees bent, hands raised lightly as though cradling a fragile bowl. The others sway, their movements synchronized with breath. You try to copy, though your arms wobble like noodles. The teacher chuckles, not unkindly, and adjusts your posture with the lightest tap. Instantly, you feel different. Balanced, steady, as though gravity itself is cooperating. Mainstream fact: early forms of Tai Chi and related practices grew out of Taoist principles, emphasizing harmony, balance, and yielding over brute force. Unlike rigid military drills, these exercises trained both body and spirit, preparing one to defend without aggression. You flow through the motions, pushing hands, circling arms, stepping slowly. The air feels thicker somehow, as if every gesture carves ripples into the morning mist. And then it clicks. The purpose isn't to strike or to win. It's to move without forcing, to let the body respond instead of resist. Quirky tidbit: some Taoist texts describe masters who could float during combat, their steps so light they barely left footprints. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor, exaggeration, or simply the art of very good balance. You glance at your own muddy sandals, sinking deep into the earth, and think, well, clearly I'm not levitating today. The group transitions into slower movements, arms drifting like clouds. You notice how your breath has synced with theirs. In as you raise, out as you lower. It's hypnotic, and soon your mind stops worrying about whether you look foolish. You're simply there. You realize that if a sparrow landed on your hand mid-motion, it wouldn't feel the need to fly away. That's the level of gentleness surrounding you. The teacher pauses to explain, though softly, as if words are unnecessary intrusions. He says a strike met with force creates pain, but a strike met with softness dissolves like water. He demonstrates with a student. The student pushes, the teacher yields, and suddenly the pusher is off balance, stumbling forward with wide eyes. The class laughs gently, not mockingly, and the student bows. Another mainstream fact: martial practices like these weren't only physical. They were tied to medicine and meditation, thought to circulate qi through the body. Quirky aside, one legend claims a Taoist master once fought by simply yawning so serenely that his opponent lost the will to strike. Historians still argue whether this is truth, fable, or just the world's laziest defense strategy. You return to the sequence, your arms heavy but your mind oddly light. The sun has risen higher now, gilding the courtyard tiles with warmth. Each movement feels less like exercise and more like a lullaby written for muscles. The teacher ends the practice by bowing slowly, hands folded. The group mirrors him, and you do too, grateful that no one comments on your clumsy attempts. As the others disperse, the teacher lingers to pour water from a clay jug into small cups. He hands you one, and the water tastes like the simplest, purest reward. No honey, no herbs, just coolness against your tongue. He nods once, the kind of nod that says, "You're learning. Not fast, but enough." You step back into the lane, body humming with tiredness, but not the heavy kind. This is the good tired, the kind that slips easily into sleep later. You realize martial arts here aren't about war. They're about waking slowly, breathing evenly, and discovering that strength can look suspiciously like gentleness. The courtyard drifts into silence behind you, and the stone path leads toward the edge of the village, where firelight flickers against the dark. You follow the glow and soon find yourself among a circle of villagers gathered around a low fire. Sparks leap into the night air, carried upward like tiny messengers to the stars. Children huddle close, their faces bright with anticipation, while elders sit cross-legged, warming their hands. You're invited with a gesture. No words, just a space opened in the circle. And you settle into the grass, the smoke sweet with burning pine. The storyteller clears his throat, his voice rough with age but steady. He doesn't rush. He waits for silence, and silence arrives willingly, settling on the group like a blanket. His tale begins not with battles or kings, but with a river, a dragon, and a fisherman who asked too many questions. You smile. It's the sort of opening that promises more patience than fireworks. Mainstream fact. Oral storytelling was a core tradition in villages across ancient China, often used to pass down local legends, moral lessons, and practical advice. It wasn't just entertainment. It was memory stitched into words. Quirky tidbit. Some storytellers carried carved wooden clappers, snapping them together to keep rhythm or to wake dozing listeners. Historians still argue whether these clappers originated in village squares or were borrowed from early theatrical troupes. You half expect tonight's elder to pull one out, but he prefers the slow rhythm of his own pauses. The tale drifts into dragons, scaled not as monsters, but as guardians of rainfall. The fisherman asks one dragon for endless fish, but the dragon, amused, grants instead a single bowl that refills itself only when the fisherman is patient. The children lean forward, wide-eyed, as though they too are learning the cost of greed. You, meanwhile, picture yourself impatiently shaking a magic bowl and spilling noodles everywhere. Not quite the moral intended. The fire pops, embers spiraling upward. Another elder adds her voice, recounting how fox spirits sometimes wandered the hills, disguised as travelers. They tested villagers' kindness, rewarding generosity with good harvests, and punishing selfishness with endless weeds. You glance nervously into the dark beyond the fire, half expecting glowing eyes. But then a boy giggles, whispering that the last fox spirit was just old Liu, returning from the tavern with too much rice wine. Another mainstream fact. Folk tales often blended Taoist values, emphasizing harmony with nature, humility, and the dangers of forcing outcomes. Quirky aside, one lesser-known tale insists that turtles could predict rain if you listened closely enough to their sneezes. Historians still argue whether this was meteorology, mythology, or just villagers mishearing splashes. You imagine a turtle with a tiny handkerchief, and it nearly ruins your composure. The stories continue, weaving dragons, foxes, spirits, and rivers into a tapestry of night. You don't notice time slipping past, because the cadence is soothing, repetitive, like waves brushing ashore. Even when the tales wander into warnings. Don't cut bamboo at night, don't whistle to the moon. The tone is gentle, like a lullaby disguised as superstition. A child leans sleepily against your shoulder, and you don't mind. The fire warms your face while the night cools your back, a perfect balance of elements. You think of Wu Wei again, the way stories, like rivers, don't rush. They meander, double back, pause for laughter, flow forward only when ready. The storyteller isn't worried about endings. He trusts that the tale will arrive at one eventually, just as sleep always does. The final story ends with a dragon who disappears into mist, leaving only the sound of water dripping from rocks. The elder closes his eyes and the circle exhales together. No applause, no fanfare, just a quiet acceptance that the night has spoken. You sit there a moment longer, letting the fire's last glow soften into embers, before standing to drift back into the shadows. The firelight fades behind you, replaced by the hush of a starlit path. You wander toward a pavilion half hidden by willow trees, where faint music drifts into the night. The notes are thin and delicate, plucked from a guqin resting on a scholar's lap. He sits alone, lantern at his side, brush and ink forgotten on a nearby table. His fingers move slowly across the 7 strings, each note fading almost as soon as it's born, like ripples that vanish before you can count them. You pause at the edge, careful not to intrude, but the scholar gestures with a tilt of his head. "Sit," he seems to say. You obey, folding your legs beneath you, and let the sound wash over you. Mainstream fact: the guqin was considered one of the 4 arts of the Chinese scholar, along with calligraphy, painting, and the strategic game of Go. To play it wasn't just entertainment, it was meditation, philosophy, and sound. Quirky tidbit: some manuals advised players to wash their hands in spring water before touching the strings, claiming the purity of sound depended on purity of spirit. Historians still argue whether this was genuine acoustics or symbolic ritual, but you imagine nervous musicians nervously scrubbing like surgeons before a concert. The melody is slow, broken by long pauses where the night seems to lean in closer. In those gaps, you hear the rustle of willow leaves, the distant bark of a dog, even your own heartbeat. The scholar closes his eyes, fingers gliding effortlessly, never rushing to fill the silence. You realize that in this music, the spaces between notes are as important as the notes themselves. He shifts into a piece that rises and falls like a mountain path. The bass strings hum like thunder rolling far away. The higher ones flicker like fireflies. You try to follow the pattern, but eventually give up. It's not a song to be understood. It's a song to dissolve into. Quirky aside, legends tell of musicians who could charm animals with the guqin. Deer pausing to listen, cranes circling in the air, fish rising near the surface of rivers. Historians still argue whether these accounts were literal or poetic, but the idea lingers. You picture a goldfish bobbing its head politely to the rhythm, and it makes you grin in the shadows. The scholar finally speaks, his voice no louder than the strings. He tells you the guqin is an instrument not of noise but of emptiness. Each note is like a drop of dew, and the silence afterward is the leaf it falls upon. You nod, though part of you suspects he's simply being poetic to justify forgetting half the notes. Another mainstream fact: Confucius himself was said to have been a skilled guqin player, using the instrument to cultivate discipline and virtue. Quirky aside, some students allegedly fell asleep during his longer performances, only to be scolded for their lack of refinement. Historians still argue whether these anecdotes were moral lessons or just jokes at Confucius's expense. The music continues, slower now, until the scholar finally rests his hand across the strings, silencing them. The absence of sound feels louder than the music itself. He bows his head as though concluding a ceremony, and you follow suit, unsure whether to clap. But clapping would feel absurd, too sharp for this moment. Instead, you breathe out slowly, letting your shoulders drop. The lantern flickers, and for a second the scholar looks like a part of the painting himself. willows arching above, water glimmering faintly nearby, music still lingering in the air like incense. You stand quietly, not wanting to break the spell, and leave him to the strings and the stars. As you step back into the night, the notes echo in your mind, not as a melody, but as a rhythm of space, patience, and quiet. Wu Wei in sound, Wu Wei in silence. You realize you've been listening not just to music, but to the philosophy itself, humming gently under every fading note. You drift toward a walled enclosure just as the night thins into pearl gray morning, and a curved moon gate opens like a yawn, inviting you inside. The garden beyond is small, but it feels endless. Winding paths, layered pavilions, and a pond so still it seems to be holding its breath. A bamboo stand whispers in one corner, and a stone bridge, zigzagging like a lazy snake, invites you to walk slowly or not at all. Your feet choose not at all, at least for a moment, because the quiet is thick enough to nap on. You step forward, and your reflection trembles in the water. Koi glide beneath the surface like drifting commas, punctuating the silence. A gardener, robes rolled to his knees, scoops fallen leaves with a bamboo rake designed for gentleness. He nods at you, the universal greeting of people who get up before everyone else. Mainstream fact. Classical Chinese scholar gardens, especially in places like Suzhou, were crafted as living paintings, arranging rocks, water, plants, and pavilions to suggest mountains and rivers in miniature. Design principles like borrowed scenery, jiejing, fold distant rooftops or hills into the composition, so the city becomes part of the garden without paying rent. You pause by a craggy Tai-Hu rock, limestone riddled with holes, like moon cheese sculpted by patient waves. The gardener taps it with his knuckles and smiles. He says the rock is thin, wrinkled, porous, and elegant, the four virtues of stone that connoisseurs debate like coffee snobs comparing roasts. You nod sagely, pretending you totally felt the elegance in your shin when you bumped it. Quirky tidbit? Some collectors once paid extravagant sums for rocks that looked like clouds, cranes, or dragons. There are records of stones given fancy names and better living quarters than certain cousins. Historians still argue whether these rocks were spiritual tools, status symbols, or the original pet rocks with imperial approval. Following the zigzag bridge, you notice how each turn reframes the scene. Bamboo becomes foreground. A pavilion slides into view, then disappears. A splash from a koi resets your attention like a soft bell. The zigzags slow your stride and, according to old whispers, discourage wandering spirits who prefer straight lines and efficient commutes. You smirk, imagining a ghost grumbling about poor urban planning while you take another slow corner. A pavilion sits over the pond on stilted legs, its eaves curving upward like a smile. You enter and lean against a lacquered pillar. In the distance, a rooftop peeks above the wall, borrowed scenery again, a reminder that the world continues, even as this garden teaches you to forget it. A breeze slips under the tiles and arranges your thoughts into neat little piles. You're not meditating, at least not on purpose, but the place is doing it for you. Mainstream fact. Many scholar garden owners were officials or literati who needed a refuge from court bustle. They read, painted, played the kin, and wrote poetry here, using nature as collaborator. One famous principle holds that a garden should reveal itself step by step, not all at once. Mystery over spectacle. Quirky aside, some manuals recommend placing a single oddly tilted tree to provoke contemplation. It's less landscape and more philosophical eyebrow. Historians still argue whether these design rules were codified early or mostly written down later to justify what gardeners had been doing by intuition for centuries. You pass a miniature hill path, just steep enough to make your calves whisper complaints. A scholar appears at the turn, sleeves wide, carrying a tray with a tiny clay teapot and cups you could almost wear as thimbles. He pours a thread of tea so slender it looks like spun glass, and you sip something grassy, floral, faintly sweet, the kind of flavor that's more mood than beverage. He says the tea tastes better because the pavilion faces water and the doorway frames bamboo. You have no idea whether that's science or poetry, but your second sip is indeed better. You don't argue with free refills. Near the pond, you find a narrow gallery whose windows cut the world into scrolls. Willow leaf shapes, moon-shaped panes, lattice patterns casting sleepy shadows on the floor. You linger at each window the way you'd linger at paintings, except these pictures breathe. The farthest frame holds only sky and the top of a neighboring gable, a reminder that someone out there is probably rushing to a meeting while you are busy mastering the art of loitering. Wu Wei approves this message. A boy enters with a shallow tray of penjing, miniature trees and rocks arranged to resemble wild mountains. He mists the tiny pines, and droplets hang on needles like stars caught at sunrise. Mainstream fact. Penjing, predecessor to Japanese bonsai, aimed not at perfect symmetry, but at the spirit of a landscape. How wind might lean a trunk, how cliffs might brood. Quirky tidbit? Some enthusiasts wrapped pebbles in moss and gave them names, then wrote poems to the stones as if they might answer. Historians still argue whether this was sincere animism or a genteel hobby that got delightfully out of hand. You circle back to the Tai Hu Rock as the gardener spreads white gravel with a rake, drawing simple ripples that echo the pond. The pattern is easily erased, easily redrawn. Nothing permanent, nothing forced. He tells you the garden should feel like a good conversation. Pauses as important as words, jokes tucked into corners, like that tilted tree, and exits wherever you need them. You think of last night's music on the guqin and realize this place hums in the same key. Notes and silences braided together. A pair of swallows skims the water, drawing invisible calligraphy your eye can almost read. The gardener chuckles that swallows always sign the best letters. You add your own signature by slowing your breath until the pond breathes back. It's not mystical, it's mechanical. A mirror only needs you to stop fidgeting before it can show you the sky. As sun climbs higher, faint city clatter drifts over the wall. Wheels, voices, the day putting on its armor. Yet inside, the garden keeps its pajamas on. You trail a finger along the bridge rail, smooth from many unhurried hands, and feel a soft conviction settle. Balance isn't a result. It's a path that refuses to be straight. You remember the duck bells in the paddies, the fisherman's river, the silent minister with 10 words, the hermit who teaches by napping. All of them echoes in this one small place where rocks pretend to be mountains and water rehearses for the sea. Before leaving, you look back through the moon gate. The circle frames everything: stone, reed, ripple, sky, as if the world has been tidied just for you. You bow a little deeper than you intended, because the garden has that effect. It makes gratitude feel like good posture. Then you step through, carrying quiet the way a jar carries light, not clenching it, just letting it glow. You leave the moon gate behind and follow a narrow lane that feels like a seam between eras. The stones under your sandals are warm from sun, but the breeze carries cool hints of pine. You don't plan where you're going. You just walk and let the path choose, the way the river chose the gap between rocks. A cart creaks by, then a bicycle you swear you recognize from your own century. Wire basket, squeaky bell, the universal soundtrack of errands. Time blurs a little, as if the garden's framing windows now open onto today. You notice it everywhere once you start looking. A woman balances bundles with a shoulder pole and doesn't wobble. A street vendor folds dumpling skins with the unhurried wrist of a calligrapher. A child drifts a leaf boat along a gutter current and somehow learns physics and patience in the same afternoon. The philosophy that promised non-forcing never really retired. It just changed outfits. You think of the farmer's duck bells, of the fisherman who let the current pull, of the silk-robed minister whose 10 words outweighed 20 scrolls. That same current threads through the market's quiet bartering, through the hermit's closed eyes, through the garden's tilted tree that argued by simply leaning. Mainstream fact. The ideas you've been walking through never stayed in one century. Taoist thought informed landscape painting in the Song period. Mountains as softened breathing, paths that vanish into mist, and later seeped into daily practices like Tai Chi in public parks, where retirees move at dawn like slow birds shaking off dew. Another mainstream thread glints. Civil examinations canonized Confucian texts for bureaucratic life, yet emperors and scholars alike kept reading the Tao Te Ching, mining it for a style of rule that governed by light touch. The combination is everywhere. Ritual spine, flexible joints. You pass a courtyard where a young clerk taps an abacus and then steps away to pour tea, letting the calculation rest a moment before confirming it. He doesn't call it meditation, but your body recognizes the pause. Across the lane, a tailor sews in long arcs and then stops to watch dust float through a shaft of light, as if the dust were a second thread her needle must respect. It's all very ordinary and quietly radical. Quirky tidbit. Somewhere down a side street you hear a faint, pleasant chirp, and a vendor lifts a tiny bamboo cage to show you a singing cricket. In late imperial times, people kept crickets for their lullaby-like songs and sometimes staged polite cricket contests that were more about bragging than brawling. You grin at the thought of a pocket-sized bedtime DJ, turned by a fingertip spin of the cage. Historians still argue whether the craze began as courtly amusement or street pastime that climbed the social ladder, but whoever started it understood sleep's favorite instrument: repetition. You wander on, and the city's tempo becomes your breath. Step, exhale, listen. Step, exhale, listen. You consider your own world, where clocks glare and calendars shout, and realize you've been taught a counterweight, not a cure. Wu Wei doesn't cancel effort. It rehearses it until effort stops squeaking. The farmer still sweats, the fisherman still hauls nets, the minister still writes drafts, only they let timing do half the work. You think of your own inbox and laugh softly, because even an email can be answered like water, not like a battering ram. Granted, some emails deserve the ram. A tea stall invites you to sit. The owner isn't in a rush to fetch the kettle. He wipes a table with the care of a scribe smoothing a bamboo slip, then sets out cups the size of thimbles. The tea arrives pale and grassy, a whisper more than a statement. You sip and feel the warm line travel down your throat, untying small knots you didn't know you had. The owner mentions, without ceremony, that his grandmother swore by lotus seeds for sleep and by not speaking for a while after sunset. He shrugs as if to say, either might work. You try both, at least for the length of one cup. Mainstream fact. The Zhuangzi, a classic of playful, dreamy prose, often subverts hard lines between waking and sleeping, between human and nature. Its butterfly dream asks whether you are a person dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of a person. That kind of gentle mischief shaped centuries of commentary and art. Historians still argue whether those tales record actual philosophical circles or literary salons performatively out-chilling each other. But the effect is lasting. Certainty loosens, and with it, anxiety's grip. You stand and drift again, and the city rearranges itself into small lessons. A porter angles his load through a crowd not by muscling forward, but by noticing tiny gaps and letting them open for him. A cook times noodles by feel rather than sand glass. Lift, listen, let go, like Tai Chi performed with wheat. A painter pins rice paper and waits for the humidity to settle before the first stroke, because forcing ink on a damp day would just bruise the fibers. You catch yourself nodding like you've learned a secret handshake. Patience, the soft tool that outlasts hard tools. At a corner, the old hermit from the mountain appears. Impossible, but there he is, barefoot, carrying a small basket of greens. He grins at your surprise and points at your feet, as if to note you're still wearing the dust of everywhere you've been tonight. The paddies, the court stones, the market grit, the garden gravel. He taps your chest once, lightly, and you understand that you're carrying more than dust. You've pocketed a cadence. You pass a guardhouse where a drum hangs idle. In earlier dynasties, such drums set curfews and marked hours. Now, a cat sleeps on the drumhead as if time itself has curled up for a nap. You consider taking this as permission. For a brief, loud moment your mind tries to schedule the nap, then you laugh and let the scheduling go. Naps, like rivers and good advice, arrive when the banks are shaped right. A last trio of images slips into your pocket for later. First, the jade pillow you mocked earlier, heavy and impractical, but also cool on a summer night. An anchor that teaches the neck to stop negotiating with the mattress. Second, the cormorant fisherman's string, ridiculous and ingenious, a reminder that partnership can look like magic when timing is kind. Third, the zigzag bridge, wasting space to find grace, confounding ghosts and rushed pedestrians with equal generosity. You realize you've been walking that bridge all night, turning, reframing, discovering the same pond from kinder angles. You slow. The day is almost here, and your own world will eventually buzz your name. But for now, you have a pocket full of restful technologies that don't need power cords. Sip slowly. Breathe with something larger than you. Let a task be smaller than your panic. Answer with 10 words instead of 20 when 10 will do. Move like someone balancing a bowl of water, even when you are only balancing opinions. You remember the teacher who said a yawn could end a fight. You try one now, and it works on your shoulders at least. You reach a threshold that could be any door. Village home, city inn, your own apartment after a long day. The hinge is polite, the room beyond dim. Somewhere, a cricket continues its soft metronome, and the fan in your world adds its steady hum. You lie down, not on bamboo tonight, but the mattress carries a faint memory of bamboo anyway, as if your back refuses to forget that simple, honest firmness. You let your breath fall into the rhythm you've been collecting all night. River slow, garden quiet, market steady. The world continues without your supervision. You approve. Mainstream fact to tuck under your pillow. The Tao Te Ching has been copied, commented on, and translated across 2 millennia, shaping statesmen and artists and everyday sleepers who just wanted their minds to loosen. Quirky tidbit to make you smile. Somewhere, even now, a tiny cricket singer is working the late shift for someone's bedtime. And because we're being honest, historians still argue whether any of this is a grand philosophy or a very old habit of pausing before you push. Either way, you drift. Either way, it works. Let the images grow softer now, as if each lantern in the city lowers its eyes and the river smooths into a band of brushed silk. The garden's moon gate closes to a simple circle, and the circle becomes a quiet breath, wider on the inside than it looks from the outside. Your thoughts slow into long vowels. Your muscles remember that they know how to be heavy. You place the night where it belongs, on your shoulders like a warm shawl, on your forehead like a cool jade stone, on your chest like a folded letter that doesn't need to be read. The farmer's bells are far away, just a hint of silver in the dark. The fisherman's net is already hung to dry. The hermit's cup is cooling on its saucer, a small moon settling into a small sky. The court has gone to paper, and the paper has gone to sleep. In this softer light, even questions are welcome. They rise like bubbles in a kettle and fade before they reach the lip. There's nothing here to solve, only things to notice, and even noticing is optional. The room leans into stillness. The fan hums its patient road. Your breath drifts like a leaf on that road, turning once, twice, and riding the easy current. If anything arrives, an old to-do, a half-sentence, a face from somewhere, let it arrive the way a swallow skims a pond, touching the surface and flying on. The water is untroubled. The pond keeps its shape. You keep yours. The bridge zigzags once more and then becomes a straight line that needs no effort at all. Sleep is the most natural guest. It does not knock. It simply lets itself in when the room is ready, and the room is ready now. End of script. Sweet dreams.